Have you ever had a moment where um, someone completely misread your reaction to something?
Oh, absolutely. It happens all the time.
Right. Like, you know the feeling. You're sitting there processing some incredibly heavy news, and you're completely swept up in your own thoughts.
Mhm.
And the person sitting across from you just snaps and goes, "Do you even care?"
Yeah, it's awful.
It is. They look at your quiet exterior and they just assume you are feeling absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, on the inside, your brain is just working in overdrive.
Your stomach is in knots.
Exactly. Your heart is practically beating out of your chest. And it's this profoundly isolating experience, to be told that your internal reality is somehow incorrect simply because it doesn't match someone else's external expectations.
It is deeply alienating.
Mm.
And I mean, it's a dynamic that plays out constantly in our society. We rely heavily on, well, a very specific set of visual shortcuts to judge what is happening inside another human being.
Right. The expected reactions.
Exactly. And when those shortcuts are absent, we tend to assume the emotion is absent too.
And that fundamental disconnect, that gap between the internal experience and the external expectation, that is the beating heart of today's deep dive.
I'm really excited for this one. I can actually hear you shuffling the stack of research we have for today.
Yeah, I've got my notes right here. We have a seriously compelling stack of research in front of us. We are looking at a deeply insightful piece from Hey ASD, which is an autistic-owned and autistic-led platform.
And they do incredible work.
They really do. This article synthesizes several groundbreaking clinical studies alongside a highly regarded guide called The Unmasking Years. I see you've got your copy open right now, actually.
I do, yes. I've got a few pages highlighted here.
Perfect. So our primary mission for this deep dive is to completely dismantle one of the oldest, most quietly damaging clinical myths about autism.
And that is the idea that autistic people lack empathy.
Yes. We're going to explore the surprising, intense reality of how autistic empathy actually works from the inside, because this is a paradigm-shifting aha moment for anyone listening.
It really is. I mean, it's a myth that has survived in textbooks and diagnostic manuals for decades.
Decades.
Yeah, primarily because the medical and psychological communities have historically operated on a fundamentally flawed, overly narrow definition of the word empathy itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source material demands that we stop treating empathy as this one monolithic trait.
Right.
It breaks empathy down into two entirely distinct cognitive processes.
Precisely. The confusion usually starts in the very way we measure social interaction. So historically, clinicians have looked at empathy as a single pass-or-fail trait.
Like, you either have it or you don't.
Exactly. But the research we are looking at divides it into cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is sometimes referred to in the literature as affective empathy.
Affective empathy.
Yeah. So cognitive empathy is essentially an intellectual exercise. It is your brain's ability to logically decode what someone else is thinking or feeling in real time.
So it's like the capacity to read a fleeting shift in a facial expression.
Yes. Or instantly decode a sarcastic tone of voice, or guess the underlying reason why someone suddenly went cold in a conversation.
Oh, I see. It's the detective work. It's the active, conscious reading of the room.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that specific part, that real-time, high-speed cognitive decoding that can genuinely require significantly more conscious effort and processing time for many autistic people.
Okay, so that part does take more effort.
It does. But the critical error was assuming that this cognitive process is the entirety of empathy, because it's completely separate from emotional empathy.
The actual feeling part.
Right. Emotional empathy is the part where you actually feel a shared emotional resonance. You're physically and emotionally moved by another person's state.
Wow.
And the data shows that for a massive portion of autistic adults, this emotional empathy is not reduced in the slightest. In fact, it's entirely intact, and in many cases, highly elevated.
Wait, really? I'm struggling to reconcile this, though. If emotional empathy is actually fully intact, how did entire generations of trained researchers just, miss it? Because you can't tell me they didn't run rigorous clinical observations, right? How does an entire medical establishment mistake a difference in cognitive processing speed for an empty emotional core?
It comes down to the criteria they were required to use. If you look at the older diagnostic language, It leaned heavily on measuring impaired social-emotional reciprocity.
Impaired social emotional reciprocity. That
Well,
sounds so clinical.
it is. Now, consider what a clinician was actually doing in an observation room during, say, the mid to late 20th century. They were heavily influenced by behavioralism.
Meaning they only cared about what they could see.
Exactly. They were trained to observe and measure external action. They sat there with a clipboard, checking off a list of visible reactions.
So, like, if a patient didn't mirror a facial expression on cue.
Right. Or if they went perfectly still when a non-autistic person would typically gasp or cry, the observer literally checked a box, indicating a lack of empathy.
Oh, wow. So the checklist itself was the flaw.
It was completely flawed.
They were grading an internal emotion using a strictly external rubric. I mean, calling an autistic person empathy-free because they take longer to decode a facial expression is like calling someone who reads slowly but remembers every single intricate detail of the plot a bad reader.
Oh, that is perfect.
Just because they didn't finish the chapter as fast as the person next to them.
The slow reader analogy captures the clinical blind spot perfectly. The observers were measuring the socially expected performance of empathy rather than the actual internal experience of it. They basically equated a still exterior with an empty interior.
But wait, if they were running formal psychological studies to back up those clipboards, didn't the data eventually show that the internal feeling was there?
Well, you would think so.
Yeah, if the feeling is present, why does so much historical literature still insist on this empathy deficit?
Because the studies were contaminated by a massive hidden variable. They were measuring a secondary condition without even realizing it.
Oh, wow.
And this is where the modern research completely shifts our understanding. The supposed deficit often wasn't autism at all. It was a completely separate condition that overlaps heavily with the autistic population. It's known as alexithymia.
Alexithymia, this was a completely new term for me when I opened the Hey ASD piece.
A lot of people haven't heard of it.
Mm.
It translates roughly to no words for emotions.
No words for a moment.
Yeah. It is the persistent difficulty in identifying, interpreting, and naming your own internal emotional states. And the statistics provided in the source material are quite staggering, honestly.
Yeah, I'm looking at them now.
According to a 2019 study by Kinnaird and colleagues, alexithymia affects roughly half of all autistic people.
Half. 50%.
Exactly. And for context, it only affects about 1 in 10 non-autistic people.
50% compared to 10%. That is a massive overlapping variable that just simply got conflated with the core neurotype.
Crucially, alexithymia is not autism. It is a distinct trait related to interoception, which is the brain's ability to perceive sensations inside the body.
Interoception. Okay.
Yeah, so think about the mechanics of this. Imagine a physical sensation blooming in your chest, like a tight, heavy knot.
Okay, I'm with you.
If you have alexithymia, your brain might struggle to map that physical sensation to a specific emotional label. You might not be able to easily tell if that knot is anxiety or grief or physical exhaustion or maybe just hunger.
Oh, I see.
And the logic follows inevitably from there. If you are constantly expending immense cognitive energy just trying to identify and label the emotions happening inside your own body, you are going to struggle to rapidly label what is happening in someone else's.
That makes the clinical error so much clearer. Researchers were observing people who were genuinely struggling to put names to emotions, and they blamed autism when they should have been looking at alexithymia.
Precisely. And our source highlights a landmark 2010 study by Bird and colleagues that proved exactly this.
Oh, I loved this part of the article.
Right. These researchers designed an experiment where they actually separated alexithymia from autism in their testing models. They didn't just ask people how they felt. They measured physiological arousal.
Things like skin conductance and heart rate, right? While subjects were exposed to emotional stimuli.
Exactly.
So they basically bypassed the verbal questionnaire and went straight to the nervous system.
Yes. And they found that the physical, emotional arousal was undeniably present in the autistic subjects. The variation in their ability to recognize and label that empathy was entirely predicted by their alexithymia scores, not their autism scores.
Wow.
When they accounted for that hidden variable, the supposed empathy deficit in autism effectively vanished.
So the feeling arrives on time, but the vocabulary is delayed.
Exactly.
But practically speaking, how does someone navigate a fast-paced argument or a highly charged social situation when the word for their own emotion might not crystallize until tomorrow?
What's fascinating here is how the autistic community describes this reality with incredible clarity. There is a quote in the Hey ASD community section that addresses your exact question.
Yeah, I remember reading this.
An autistic adult shared, "The emotion arrives in full force, and the word for it shows up an hour later or the next day or never."
Or never. That is so powerful.
It really highlights how we have to recognize the immense difference between experiencing an emotion and narrating it. If you demand that someone instantly articulate their feelings just to prove they have them, you are setting an impossible standard for a nervous system dealing with alexithymia.
And if the emotional response is being recorded physiologically, the text suggests it's not just hitting a baseline level. We are actually talking about the exact opposite of the stereotype. The article argues that many autistic adults don't feel too little. They feel entirely too much.
The clinical term for this is hyperempathy.
Hyperempathy.
Yes, because empathy is not just an abstract philosophical concept. It is a central nervous system event.
And the article gives these vivid physical examples of what hyperempathy actually feels like. It describes an autistic person absorbing the mood of a room the second they walk in, before a single word is even spoken. Or someone watching a stranger's distress on the evening news and having it literally hijack their entire nervous system for the rest of the day. They end up carrying a stranger's pain in their own physical body.
Which is exhausting. And understanding that profound systemic intensity is the key to understanding a coping mechanism that the outside world tragically misinterprets.
Right?
If feeling someone else's distress is physically overwhelming, if it is actually flooding your sensory processors, what is your biological imperative going to be?
You have to protect yourself.
You have to regulate. You might withdraw. You might go entirely nonverbal. You might physically leave the room or abruptly try to change the subject.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you don't withdraw, you'll short circuit. Let's look at the mechanics of that. If someone is blasting music so loud that the speakers blow out and go completely silent, it's not because there was no audio signal.
No, not at all.
The signal was just overwhelmingly strong and the hardware had to shut down to protect itself. Is that what an autistic shutdown actually represents? Like, the quiet exterior isn't an empty room, it's a blown speaker?
That is an excellent way to conceptualize the neurological reality. The sensory and emotional input simply exceeds what the system can process in that moment.
Wow.
But from the outside, to an observer with a clipboard, that sudden withdrawal looks like coldness. It looks like a lack of care. But from the inside, it is an act of sheer self-preservation from caring entirely too much.
That's heartbreaking, really.
It's a profound tragedy. The ultimate expression of deep, overwhelming empathy, being so moved by someone else's pain that you have to physically withdraw to survive the feeling, is the exact behavior that gets weaponized against autistic people as proof that they are indifferent.
And this mutual mismatch doesn't just stay in the clinical lab either. It trickles down into everyday relationships, meaning the friction people feel in their own living rooms isn't necessarily a medical deficit. It's a translation error.
A huge translation error.
Which brings us to a tension in the research. If autistic people are experiencing this profound level of emotional empathy, why is communication between autistic and non-autistic people so consistently fraught?
Well, that brings us to what is arguably the most important conceptual shift in modern autism research. It is known as the double empathy problem, which is a theory proposed by an autistic researcher named Damian Milton in 2012.
The double empathy problem. Break down how that reframes the conversation.
So for decades, the paradigm was entirely one-sided. When communication broke down between an autistic person and a non-autistic person, the medical field pointed the finger exclusively at the autistic individual.
They diagnosed a deficit in social communication.
Exactly. But Milton pointed out the inherent arrogance in that assumption. He observed that non-autistic people are equally poor at reading autistic emotional cues.
Wait, so it's like two different operating systems trying to network, say, a Mac and a PC?
Yes.
And we've spent decades blaming the Mac for being broken just because it doesn't run Windows natively. That makes perfect sense logically. People with similar processing styles naturally fall into a shared rhythm. But why has one neurotype been treated as the default while the other gets pathologized?
Because of majority privilege, essentially. They absolutely ignored that symmetry for decades and just labeled the minority style as inherently deficient. Non-autistic people frequently misjudge a flat tone of voice as boredom, or they view a lack of eye contact as deceit or disinterest.
Right.
They routinely miss the autistic person's signals of care. And the empirical evidence backs this up beautifully. Our source cites a brilliant 2020 study by Crompton and colleagues that tested this mutual misunderstanding.
Oh, this study was fascinating. How did they actually test for that? Because how do you measure a breakdown in communication without relying on those same subjective clipboards?
They modeled it after the game of telephone.
Oh, that's clever.
They created what is called a diffusion chain to test information transfer. They had 3 distinct groups: a chain of only autistic people, a chain of only non-autistic people, and a mixed chain of both.
Okay.
They passed a story down a line and measured how much detail survived. The information degraded significantly and rapidly in the mixed group.
In the Mac and PC group.
Exactly. But crucially, the all-autistic group transferred the information just as accurately and effectively as the all-non-autistic group.
So the Macs communicate with Macs perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine. Furthermore, the autistic participants reported much higher levels of rapport and comfort when interacting with each other.
So it's less like one person is refusing to speak and more like 2 people trying to play a complex duet when one is reading sheet music and the other is playing strictly by ear.
Yes.
The music itself isn't broken, but their methods of getting there are colliding, creating dissonance.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is why the double empathy problem is so revolutionary. It completely removes the assumption of a broken individual.
Right.
It locates the difficulty exactly where it belongs, in the space between 2 different communication styles. The issue is a lack of cross-cultural rapport, not a biological deficit in the autistic brain.
Historically, the burden of fixing that dissonance hasn't been shared. One group has always been forced to learn the other's sheet music. According to the guide referenced in the article, The Unmasking Years, the cost of bridging that gap has fallen almost entirely on the shoulders of autistic people.
Yeah, I have that section flagged right here. That is the daily painful reality of masking. For their entire lives, autistic people are conditioned to perform neurotypical empathy.
Performing it.
They have to actively force themselves to make eye contact, to manually manufacture the correct facial expressions, and to suppress their natural self-regulating behaviors. And all of this is done just to make the non-autistic majority feel comfortable.
That sounds exhausting.
It is a massive cognitive load, and it is a lifelong, exhausting performance.
Understanding this two-way street doesn't just correct an old textbook error. It provides an entirely new framework for how you navigate the relationships in your own life. Because moving from this clinical theory into actual practice, well, it changes the rules of engagement.
It really does. For late-diagnosed autistic adults, reading about the double empathy problem often provides a profound sense of relief.
I can imagine.
If you have spent your whole life being told by partners or family members that you are emotionally distant or that you don't care, you can finally understand that the friction isn't proof of a fundamental flaw in your character.
You're simply speaking a native language to someone who doesn't understand the vocabulary.
Precisely.
The article highlights a quote from an autistic adult about the sheer relief of stepping out of that friction. They said, "The first time I talked to another autistic person, I didn't have to explain a single thing. I'd never had a conversation that didn't feel like work."
That quote gets me every time.
It's incredible. Imagine going decades feeling like every interaction requires real-time translation and then finally getting to just exist.
It perfectly illustrates why autistic to autistic relationships can feel so effortless.
Yeah.
But we have to address mixed neurotype relationships because the source material offers highly practical advice for that exact dynamic.
Yes, the actionable care part.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It begins with recognizing a concept called actionable care.
So contrast that with what we typically expect from empathy.
We'll think about how we culturally define sympathy. It usually involves making a sad face, tilting your head, and saying something verbally soothing.
Right, the performative stuff.
Autistic people often bypass the performative aspect and show their deep empathy through concrete action. They might hyper-focus on fixing the root cause of your problem.
Oh, like they want to solve it.
Yeah. They might spend 3 hours researching a practical solution to a medical issue you just casually mentioned. Or they might engage in parallel play, just coming to sit quietly in the same room with you, offering a calming, undemanding presence.
So, what does this all mean? If someone is showing love by spending hours quietly researching a solution to your problem, but you are frustrated that they aren't matching your somber facial expressions, who is actually failing to be empathetic in that moment?
Well, it's a mutual miss.
Yeah.
The non-autistic person in that scenario is missing the profound empathy right in front of them because it isn't packaged the way they expected.
All right.
But the solution suggested by the research isn't to force the autistic person to perform the facial expressions, nor is it to force the non-autistic person to never need verbal reassurance.
Oh.
Both parties need to bridge the gap.
So how do they actually do that? Because asking someone to just communicate there is, pretty vague.
The Hey ASD article strongly recommends replacing implicit hints with highly explicit direct statements.
Be direct, okay.
When you use an indirect hint, like sighing heavily while doing the dishes and hoping your partner picks up on your tone to realize you are overwhelmed, you are demanding high-speed cognitive decoding.
You are demanding they read the sheet music when they play by ear?
Yes. Instead, you bypass the cognitive decoding step entirely. You explicitly say, I am feeling overwhelmed today and I need support with the house.
That makes so much sense.
By being direct, you remove the translation barrier and you give their deep emotional empathy a clear, immediate path to reach you.
Wow. We have covered so much ground today. I mean, we started by dismantling that old clipboard and checklist methodology that equated a quiet exterior with an empty interior. We uncovered the massive hidden variable of alexithymia, realizing that struggling to label an emotion does not mean the emotion isn't burning brightly inside.
Right.
We looked at the neurological reality of hyperempathy, understanding that a sudden shutdown is often a sign of a blown speaker, a nervous system protecting itself from an overwhelming flood of care. And finally, we examined the double empathy problem, recognizing that miscommunication is a shared failure of translation, not a one-sided medical deficit.
The landscape of how we understand neurodiversity is shifting rapidly, and moving away from a deficit-based model is the most vital step we can take, not just in research, but in our living rooms.
It fundamentally changes how we view each other. But there is a broader implication in all this research that we haven't explicitly named yet, and I want to leave you with this final thought to consider.
It's a big one.
It is. Think about everything we've uncovered today regarding masking, the exhaustion of cognitive empathy, and the historical demand for a specific performance. If empathy is fundamentally about bridging the gap between two different minds and making a genuine, good faith effort to understand an experience that is entirely unlike your own, isn't demanding that an autistic person suppress their natural instincts and express their feelings in a strictly neurotypical way actually the ultimate failure of empathy on the part of the non-autistic world?
That is the exact question this research demands we ask ourselves. It forces society to turn the clinical lens back onto its own expectations.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope that the next time you find yourself in a confusing interaction, whether someone is misreading your reaction entirely or you find yourself rushing to judge someone else's quiet exterior, you will remember the blown speaker.
Remember that a lack of expected sound does not mean there is no signal.
Exactly. Sometimes the signal is just too profound for the system to hold. Until next time, keep questioning your assumptions.